VLR.
Their Finest Hour is a production of Vigilant Liberty Radio. All opinions expressed are just that, and are not necessarily those of VLR, any panelist or guest, or any organization they may be associated with. Also, as this is an internet program, language and content may reflect the age of the participants. That being said, it's time to go.
Flight controllers, go for landing. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. ECOM, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for landing. Eagle, Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
This was their finest hour.
I do understand, go for landing.
I speak to you in a solemn hour of the cause of freedom.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
Until we can re-establish a condition under which the earnings of the people can be kept by the people, we are bound to suffer a very severe and distinct curtailment of our liberty.
We copy you down, Eagle.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Vigilant Liberty Radio and Their Finest Hour. I'm your host, Alan Bordius. You can, of course, find me on Twitter at Alan Bordius. That's ALLANBOURDIUS. I might be changing that slightly in the days ahead, but we'll see. But my program tonight is pre-recorded due to other commitments, so I'm sorry I won't be interacting with our listeners this evening. Today is Monday, February 9th, 2015. Michael J. Ohler was a captain in the United States Marine Corps. He was killed in action by an enemy sniper in Beirut, Lebanon, on October 16th, 1983. 1 week later was the horrific suicide truck bomb attack that killed 241 American servicemen, predominantly Marines. Had he lived, today would also have been Captain Ohler's 60th birthday. Why is this important, and why am I talking about it? Well, thanks to Twitter, I've made the acquaintance of his daughter, Sarah. You might know her from Twitter as Solar Sarah, at SOHLERSARAH. She's the one who usually has a female statue as her Avi. Sarah and I first started interacting over Twitter, best as we can figure, on May 1st, 2014. And it was just 2 weeks later that in the context of the Trey Gowdy Benghazi hearings, as I was calling out some folks over Twitter who were basically saying Ronald Reagan would have handled Benghazi differently, that I called out our 40th president for the 267 unavenged Americans killed in action in Beirut from 1982 to 1984. Sarah caught that tweet, read my memorial post that I had linked to the 267, and found her father's name in it and let me know who he was. I really can't relate the effect that chance encounter, if you want to call it chance, and I don't, had on me. It allowed me to personalize a post that I'd been trying to finish for months at Pocketful of Liberty, surrounding how the human capital of our brave American warriors has been wasted on military expeditions and wars that haven't produced victories or lasting beneficial effects. And because of that and other more enjoyable interactions, I made a friend in Sarah Ohler. Meeting Sarah also made me realize something else. We spend lots of time remembering the fallen, those who served, and those who still suffer physically or mentally because of their service. We tend to forget the families who are left behind. When I wrote my Pocketful of Liberty piece, it's called Thinking About Memorial Day, the American Deficit of Victory, if you want to find it, and used Sarah's dad as the rapper, I noticed then that his birth date of February 9th, 1955 would be a big year coming up. He'd have been 60 years old. I knew that I'd offer Sarah and her family the opportunity to have themselves heard for the occasion, and she very graciously agreed to speak with me. So here, pre-recorded last week, is my conversation with Sarah Ohler, for the most part unedited, because, well, she deserves to be heard as she is, standing as she does in this case, for the families of all the fallen. Good afternoon, Sarah. Thank you so much for giving me some of your time to talk to me, because I know this is a subject near and dear to your heart for obvious reasons. And as you know from the conversations we had, I struggled for a while even asking if you wanted to talk to me about this or write something about it. And I'm very glad you decided to, because I believe recording the stories of families of men and women who've been lost in combat are important. We hear so much about the people who go off to do the fighting, and we put out our hearts and our prayers for the families, but long afterwards, we sort of forget. At least that's my impression. So many of us don't have friends or relatives who lost their lives or were injured, wounded, what have you, in military service. So thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Of course, the other reason for doing this sort of now, and really when this recording hopefully will go to air, is going to be on February 9th, 2015, which coincidentally would have been your father's 60th birthday.
Yes, it would have been.
So, wish him a very happy birthday. Wish he was with us, as I'm sure you do. And I really struggled with coming up with what questions can I ask you and not seem like a complete insensitive fool. And I'm being nice to myself by saying fool.
Nothing bothers me.
Well, that's good, but I can imagine, because you at least in my perception, more so in the last 9 months or so, you're a lot more open about who your dad was, and you tweeted some pictures recently, which are adorable, and we'll make sure to use some of those in the show promo post and everything, because they're fantastic. But you were, of course, very young when your father went off with the Marines to Beirut, and still very young when he didn't come home. You were 2, correct?
Yes.
And the first thing, this is something that you talked to me about when we sort of prepped for this last week, which I just thought was a wonderful story. But you actually have what we think is a real memory of your dad. And it's something that's just sort of trivial, but it's kind of sweet.
I do. And it's very short. It's seconds long, but it's of being in the kitchen in North Carolina and just walking past these hairy legs and starting to round this corner to go to where I would sit down. And that's it. It's really short, but it's very, and we can never find pictures of it. There's nothing, there was never a story told about it or anything.
And like I told you, the reason why I think it's a real memory, and I don't find it unusual that you would have something like that. It just because it is such an innocuous moment. There's no reason why anybody would remember it.
Heavens no.
But thankfully you do have a lot of good pictures and everything. And thank you for sharing some of them.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's funny that you said about feeling like I had been more open about it. I think that, I don't know, most of the time it just feels like I'm doing, to show a bunch of pictures of my dad. I don't know, that gets old, and who wants to hear about, I realize a few people might be interested, but it's really just been because of people's reaction and how kind everybody has been that I think that I kept doing it or talked more about it, because usually I don't, not because it bothers me, but just because, there she goes again, talking about her dad.
Well, I would say, how can you not? We all, in certain circumstances, we talk about our parents and how they have influenced us and everything. And even though, sadly, he wasn't around, your father influenced you a lot, I'm sure. And, that probably comes from what your mother has told you about him, from the pictures you've seen, and the fact that you grew up without him.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that what really, it's great. I have an amazing legacy from him, but I think that it's more of not having him that is what affected my life. And I don't know.
Well, that's okay. I really, like I said, I don't like asking these things. I feel incredibly insensitive doing it.
No, you know what? Growing up, it was actually really strange. It was, I preferred talking about it, and it's something that usually most people hear, and they immediately will shut up about it. You know, they find out, and then they just, that's it. Oh, I'm sorry, they're done. And instead, I wanted to talk about it. I like it when people are interested and I can talk about it. And I, believe it or not, I usually don't get very emotional, at least not when I'm just talking or conversing with somebody. Sometimes, but not usually.
Yeah, and you know, I can understand that from looking at it from my perspective, that you have the sense of, oh gosh, I can't ask somebody about that. It must be too painful for them to talk about. And I think in a lot of cases it might be. But it's good, you know, when people are willing to talk about it, because you had a mom who lost a husband, you had you who lost a father, and you have a brother who hadn't even been born yet. Correct?
He had.
Oh, he had. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, when I think Dad left in May, and my brother was born in June.
Okay.
So he actually did get to see one or two pictures of my brother.
Okay. But never got to hold his son or meet him, which is really a tragedy. Yeah. But yeah, and I know, just to set the stage, I know I asked you before, but your mother never remarried. No. And have you ever asked her why, or has she ever said anything about that? Well, not that I want you to put words in her mouth, because
no, I'm just laughing because if you knew her, for the first 19 years, you wouldn't have had to ask why. It was because she was
so focused on you and your brother.
Well, she was in love with my dad. Right. Even with the memory of him, and just wasn't. And I think it took her 19 years to work through a lot of the grief and even get to the point where she could start to think about other people. So.
No, that's fair. This is maybe you remember, maybe you don't, but I'm sort of curious about is, I know certainly in the post-Vietnam era and through today, there's a very good, at least initial support structure that the military has for the families of men and women who are killed or injured in action, or even in peacetime too. And there is a, for want of a better, I don't know the actual term, but there's a casualty notification officer who does the notification, spends time with the family, helps out with arrangements and all of that. What I'm curious about is, was there any sort of ongoing contact that your family got from the Marines? Just, periodic, hey, how you doing? Were you aware of any of that? I'm just curious.
I don't really know. I know that, and in fact, I think my mom must have been, after the beginning, she kind of went into shock, and like, we can ask her, she remembers certain things, but there's a lot about right after. I guess it was in a lot of newspapers. She had some interviews. And it's just it was too much for her, and she doesn't remember a lot about that, but I'm sure she would remember that. We stayed involved. Like, we went to, have you ever heard of Officers Christian Fellowship?
I have, yeah.
So OCF. So we did stuff with OCF, and we knew people through there. And my dad's friends, they stayed in touch, but I don't know. I don't actually know the answer to that one.
Okay. And I know you said at one point, I think it was the 20-year, or was it the 15-year? You said you actually went to one of the Marine Corps 83 Beirut reunions.
The 15-year.
15.
Mm-hmm. That was actually pretty incredible.